So, Jared, President Trump was actually asked yesterday about whether gas and oil prices will be down by the midterms. I'm not sure how much he actually can control that, but here's what he said.
Do you believe the price of oil and gas will be lower before the midterm elections?
I hope so. I mean, I think so. It could be. It could be or the same or maybe a little bit higher, but it should be around the same. I think this won't be that much longer.
Jared, what does impact whether the prices go up or down between now and then? And how long do you expect prices to stay elevated?
Let's start with the last part of your question. I expect prices to be elevated at least throughout the rest of this year. So let's be very clear about that. And I thought President Trump was being uncharacteristically honest about that. I mean, remember, the average national price for gas before the war started was $3 a gallon. That's over $1 higher now, of course. So we're around $4.12, $4.13 today. National average, obviously much higher in places like California. But the expectation is that we're not going to get back to that $3 anytime this year, almost regardless of what happens. We've talked before about this rocket feathers phenomenon, the fact that the gas price takes the elevator up and the stairs down. And virtually every forecast I've seen suggests that we'll be, if we're lucky, we'll be in the mid threes by the end of the year.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the president and advisors have been privately hearing from cabinet officials, political allies, and corporate leaders about what the war could do to Wall Street and Main Street if it didn't conclude within a tight time frame. And many cautioned against or drew up scenarios for a more extended fight. The White House said it's working with private sector people to mitigate the disruptions. What could the private sector do?
Not a whole lot, because there are elements of the private sector that are doing great based on these dynamics. America has become, as we've often said in our conversations, a net exporter of energy, a particularly refined product. And the producers of that are, of course, doing very well. Their profitability has really shot up. In fact, I've heard calls to hit them with some kind of an excess profits tax to help offset the cost of the war. I do want to drill down briefly into something that's important here. You mentioned the president doesn't have control of the gas price. That's almost invariably true. In this case, it's actually not. I mean, the president decided to prosecute this war of choice in an area where he was roundly warned that the choke point of Hormuz would become exactly that, and that this would put upward pressure on oil and gas prices. So here's a rare instance where you can very easily connect the dots between the president's actions and the increase in energy costs.
As we know, oil and gas is tied to what we pay for all kinds of products, right? And everything feels expensive right now. Axios is calling inflation the economic problem of the decade, as it has persisted as a problem now for 5+ years. Jared, inflation was up 3.3% year to year in March. Saw its biggest monthly gain since 2022. Is there a way to break out of this cycle? What do you see?
Wow, that's a really tough one. I mean, first of all, the thing you want to do in that kind of a situation where you're concerned about underlying pressures in the basic structure of inflation is to do no harm. So inflation was coming down when President Trump took office the second time. It was settling back into what the Federal Reserve calls its target of around 2%. And then he went off on this tariff campaign. So I think it's important to recognize that inflationary pressures were rearing their head pre-war, before the war took effect. This had to do with tariffs. It had to do with deportations, leading to higher production costs for food. And in fact, we saw food inflation. You and I have talked about this. Food inflation was actually elevated pre-war. And based on the correct comments you just made, particularly about fertilizer, about a third of which goes through the Strait, those price pressures are yet to come. So I would think doing no harm, trying to dial back the war, which I suppose you could put the ceasefire under that rubric, and certainly taking down these sweeping tariffs would be a step in the right direction.